Before we begin today's episode, The Art of Play now has an official time slot. This episode today was recorded before we had it finally confirmed. But wherever you're listening to this from, you can now listen to our episodes every Thursday at 9 p.m. Atlantic Time on CHSR 97.9 FM in Fredericton, New Brunswick. If you're listening to this online or are going to be out of town, you can still catch our episodes live at the same time on chsrfm.ca. That's chsrfm.ca. Now, let's get on with the episode and enjoy our discussion on depth versus complexity in game design. We are students of the art of play.
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
A show for the players who ask, why?
My name's Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
So, Gaia, what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to be going into what I'm going to kind of call the penultimate topic for this show. This is the topic that got me to want to do this show in the first place, got me messaging you to do a show while I was in the middle of a random class one day, which is the class I'm doing after this recording.
Yeah.
It's the concept that really got me kind of into game design in some way. It's kind of the thing that hit hard for me when looking into these topics. And it's the idea of depth versus complexity. Now, I know you and I have talked about this a good few times. It was kind of how I got you into this idea of doing the show in the first place. So can you give me your quick basic understanding of what is depth versus complexity?
So, complexity would be the measure of how much stuff exists for someone to process.
Yeah.
And then depth being how much you can do with the options provided.
Yeah.
So complexity would be like the map of options, and depth would be how much you get to process about those options.
Yeah.
How much you can do with the information you're given.
Yeah, so fundamentally, depth versus complexity is a core concept, like a fundamental piece of game design. It's the measurement of how much you process versus how much you can do with what you've processed. I've seen lots of various descriptions of it. I saw a very good description from someone who said it's how much exists versus how much you can do with it. I like all of these various descriptions.
So complexity being how much exists, and
Yeah.
depth being what you can do with it.
Yes, exactly. Now, in game design, this can be a very important concept, as for a lot of your players, you have to be thinking on it. Well, it's hard to, but you have to be thinking of what will your players be seeing? What will your players be doing? How will they perceive your game? There's always that discussion of the first 10 seconds, the first 10 minutes. How long do you have to capture the player to make them interested and fascinated by your game before they'll just simply turn it off for something they're more comfortable with? And depth versus complexity shows that in a very fundamentally important way. It shows your players what they have to be processing, what they have to do. It shows them how big this game is, how much of an investment it is versus what the reward will be. And failing at that is going to fundamentally lose you most of your player base. And as a player, let me ask you this question as a player. Have you ever sat down to play a game? And let's say you were just going through a phase of, let's say, Legend of Zelda, but you wanted to branch out. You sit down to play a game, you look at it, and you get so overwhelmed so fast that you just close it and go back to a game you love.
Yes.
That's a complexity problem.
So I think this is a very good segue into our examples in a way. I will say this anecdote. My younger brother, adores Dark Souls. Loves it. Hands down favorite game.
Who doesn't in this day and age?
Well, so here's the thing. He bought Dark Souls for me for Christmas. And I currently do not have the mental capacity with school and my extremely busy life to sit down and learn the complexity of Dark Souls.
No, and I can't imagine you would. That game is massive.
And the thing is when I was home for Christmas and I was working through some of the opening stages, it was really awesome to have another person there. For a one-player game, though, to have another person there being like, oh, you need to do this next. You need to do that next. And that is a complexity problem.
Yeah.
There is a lot of stuff to process, and you can do a lot of it all at once.
Yeah. So we're going to go through a lot of different examples of complexity and depth. So in this episode, we as the hosts are going to be going through a number of examples of depth versus complexity in a wide variety of games and systems to make sure you as the viewer, you as the player, as the person that matters in this equation, are able to identify it and understand why sometimes games just don't appeal to you and other times games hit just right. So I want to talk about a few different mechanics and kind of a little rapid fire before we go really into the games.
Do we want to start with our ever-present touchstone D&D? Do you think that's a good place to
I think
start
we
here?
definitely should.
Okay.
I think that's a great one. So D&D has a lot of mechanics. And let me paint a bit of a picture for you into one of the pitfalls of depth versus complexity. It's easier to understand when it fails than when it succeeds. So you are sitting down to play D&D.
It's one of those mechanics that is like ever present, and when it's done well, it's unnoticeable.
It's unnoticeable.
It's one of those things like, I'm a theater kid.
Of course.
We can tell that from the everything about me. I'm just so everyone listening knows, I'm sitting in a Halloween costume in a studio, just looking at Gaia, just
looking
wearing a shirt
right across the aisle at us.
So we can tell I'm a theater kid from the everything about me. In theater, it's you know that something is done well when it's not noticeable, right?
Yeah,
when
when someone does their job right, no one knows you've done the job
notices.
at all.
Especially like for technical theater is what I'm thinking of specifically, right? When the set transition is done really well, you don't notice it. But if somebody fumbles it, you notice. And I think that's the same here.
It is. So let me paint a bit of a picture. I'm going to give a bad example and let you give the good example. You can be the positive one in this discussion.
I love that.
I love it. So here's an example of a big problem within D&D. Now, let's say you are a new player. You're sitting down to play D&D. You have D&D Beyond open to make it as easy as possible, and you're like taking a look at the stat sheet. So you click Create a Character, which everyone would do. You click Next because who cares about that first screen, which already that first screen is full of things you don't know.
Yes,
And
it is. What content do you want to pull from?
Do you want encumbrance? Do you care about funds at all? Do you care about gold weight?
Me very quickly looking up the definition of encumbrance just to know if I should toggle that on or off.
Yeah, so that's already a problem. You click the next page and you're immediately faced with what race do you pick? And you click on any single one of those races, or species, I think is probably a better term, subspecies, yeah. You click on any one of them and it says +2 charisma, +1 intelligence. You can see up to 30 feet in darkness. Once per turn as a bonus action,
you can
activate
do all
rage.
of these. Yeah, all of these things.
And none of that makes any sense. You've had no context. You've probably not read a rule book yet. There are rule books on the site, but you have no context up to this point. And then you have to pick a class, and a good class depends on which race you picked in the beginning in the first place.
Now let me flip this the other way.
Yes.
If you were a beginning player and you had bought something like the Player's Handbook, and the Player's Handbook outlines do this first, then do this. I would argue that the easiest way to do this is to flip through the Player Handbook, have a good idea. But when you're looking at a system as complex as D&D, that order doesn't matter because the system is so complex.
There's so much stuff you need to know. And I use D&D Beyond because that's the example most people are going to use. But even in the D&D starter set with pre-made character sheets, you have 20 stats based on 6 big stats versus your initiative and health and proficiency bonus, and then your middle area for your HP.
And this
the
isn't
area
even
below it for
counting
attacks,
spells and
items,
feats and abilities and
what is EP? It doesn't actually say in the starter set until page 20, right? And I think that also explains another problem. You pick up a player's handbook and you're 50 pages in before you're doing anything. I don't actually know the real number, but that's a huge problem with depth versus complexity in D&D. So it has a large mental space, brain power investment to get into it.
A lot of context you have to understand before you get to be active.
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
game.
Now let me kind of ping pong this over to you. Ask you, what is an example of depth, the reward for making it through D&D Beyond, the reward for these stats, the reward for these items, the rewards for just the pain you go through to understand it all?
Are you saying once I've understand it, or
assume you've made it through?
I've made it through the gauntlet of creating a player.
What is the depth you get in return?
The depth you get is your ability to play, right? Is your ability to role play, to interact with narrative. That's the bit that doesn't take a whole lot of explaining. Is the DM setting up, you're in a castle. What do you do? Your next step is, oh, well, I just act. I get to do the things that are on my paper.
Not even that. You can do anything as long as your DM says yes.
You can do anything, right? That is the reward, is player agency of that game.
So we look at complexity as what you have to understand, how much you have to think about and process. And then the reward is everything. You can do anything, interact with anything. You want to go climb a wall to hang from a chandelier? Go for it. You want to pull the rug out from under someone to see if it trips them to kind of get the sneak on them? You can do that. The options in D&D are nearly endless in opportunities, and we all have many stories of wonderful things that have happened. I think about one of my friends playing a sorcerer who was doing wild magic and got hit with wild magic target on themselves. I told them, you feel a building pressure, a building heat, and this feeling of a ticking, and he immediately ran over to the enemies to bear hug them before he got hit with a random fireball centered on himself, and he won the battle because of it. It downed him, but he won. This type of depth, all of his decisions and his understanding culminated in this one blaze of glory, quite literally, against the opponents. That's the reward from D&D.
But you have so much up front to take in.
Oh, so much.
And that isn't even trying to act on this character that you've built. Like, let's imagine you play that's not a word. Let's imagine you play a magic class, right? You end up with a huge spell list, right?
Oh, a massive spell list.
You know, as a beginning player, I remember looking at my spell list being like, but when can I use this? When is it useful to me?
I remember I played a game, and it was Session 0, I was the DM, and one player came in playing a wizard, and they had 0 spells selected, and I asked them why. Like, we were actually like 20 or 30 minutes in, and they're like, I didn't understand looking at it, so I just would go by without it. And I'm like, you're a wizard.
That is your whole thing,
dude.
That
is all you do.
Yeah, you don't have anything.
That's the start and stop of your character.
You trip over a rug, you're dead. You need, like...
You need to cast shield to save yourself from your own falling.
Yes. Like, if you're playing a clumsy wizard, you've already died.
That's it. It's done. Game over.
Actually, next character build.
A clumsy wizard.
Clumsy wizard.
Yeah, and, like, looking at depth...
I'm calling him Klutz.
Klutz. That's a wonderful name. But looking at depth, I think about the time I played D&D and made a character that was literally just a horse who could teleport between shadows and walk on walls. That was his entire character.
Thought of a really good example of a tabletop gaming system that is not very complex but is quite deep.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you haven't played Wanderhome, and I will talk about Wanderhome, which was created by Jay Dragon. Oh, every episode, because it is a wonderful system that really pushes narrative onto players. And in this game, you play as kind of like Redwall-esque, like, creatures. Like, you're Dale creatures. You're a mouse or a rabbit or a fox based on your character class, which I think is just called a playbook in this game. But what Wanderhome sets you up to do really well, because there isn't a DM by design, there isn't a DM, there isn't a guide, is that players are in charge of narrative. They're in charge of places, and they're in charge of NPCs on the spot. And Wanderhome sets you up really well to do this by giving you a list of things that you can always do. So I'm playing a dancer is the name of the class. And some things I can always do are leap onto a tall object and, like, look, across a space, right? I can always dance. I can always sing a song. Like, those are things that I can always do. So it gives you this little card, basically, of, hey, if you get stuck in narrative, if you get stuck and you don't know what to do, you can always do these things. And it rolls your narrative on without being incredibly complex.
Yeah,
right?
It makes it possible to understand things without needing to fully be thinking about everything at the same time.
Yes.
So we have a picture of depth versus complexity, and turning a bit to the audience for this one. You, as an audience member, might have played a wide variety of games featuring skill trees. And we're going to be talking about 2 primary examples for this now, and that's going to be the game Skyrim and then World of Warcraft and other MMOs similarly. So let's paint the picture. You're playing Skyrim, you just got your first level up, you're probably near Whiterun at this time, maybe your second level up by then, and the game is giving you this little notification, open the skill trees. So you click the button in the inventory, go up to the skill trees, well, in the menu that goes to inventory, you go up to the skill trees, and you're presented with, I think, 18 skill trees separated by 3 separate colors. Blue, which contains magic, green for thievery, and red for kind of fighting. And you pick that up very quickly. The red has one-handed, two-handed, and shields. The blue has destructive, aberration, and illusion or restoration. And the green has quite literally sneak and speech and thievery, which I think is called pickpocketing in that game. And you are thinking about how you want to play the game as a character. So you are thinking, I have a sword, I have a shield, I'm having a lot of fun with it. I haven't looked at the spells yet because they're a little much. I want to keep doing that. So you click the one-handed button for one-handed swords, and it gives you one skill to start off. And it just increases your attack speed or your damage, one of those two, I can't remember which. And you look through the later tree because you're curious, and it's always these little buffs of a little more damage, a little more speed. Your attacks have a random chance to do crits. You sometimes get like a special finishing move that triggers more often, looks really cool. And that's also very important, the reward, but we'll get into reward systems in a later episode. But that's it. And you say, I feel better as a character playing with swords. And you might notice that each tree has its own level. You have to use swords to get better at swords, but that's a bit of complexity you probably don't care about right now because you can upgrade any tree you want with 0 experience. And there you go. Maybe you put a point into shields if you're at your 3rd level, you quit out, and you go back to playing the game. You have now just experienced a system where you had a lot of information in front of you. You had like 18 skill trees, but you just saw one that worked for you, clicked it, and now you just had 1, maybe 2 skills, and that was it. And you look at the rest and you're like, oh, that's later, and you're done. You've spent maybe a minute understanding this massive skill tree system, and that's it. And you've gotten rewards.
This sounds like a system that works really well.
It does. It works amazingly. You got a deep system. There are 18 things you can upgrade and build your character perfectly. Spell sword, you can do it. One-handed swordsman, two-handed swordsman, axe user, mace user, you got it. Perfect spells, summoning and buffing yourself, you can do it. Sneaking around with bows and knives and pickpocketing people, you can do it. You can build whatever combination you want, and they don't need to be standard because what you do levels up certain skills. And it's very obvious immediately because every skill bar says, here's your progress in this skill. Then there's a bar. You're done. Now let's compare this to MMOs. You boot up your favorite MMO, World of Warcraft. Actually, that game got canceled recently, so I don't know. I actually don't know any other MMOs at the moment.
No, you boot up
Final Fantasy 14.
Oh.
Sure.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, if you want the bad one, Final Fantasy 12, 13, whichever one it was. Yeah. Anyways, you boot up a new MMO, and the game tells you, pick a class, pick a character, right from the beginning. Now, we've already talked about how bad of an idea that is. D&D does it, and it is, well, D&D Beyond does it at least. And it is pain, pure pain. So we've already got how bad that is. So you select it, it tells you to pick good guys or bad guys.
Bad in a new player kind of way.
Yeah.
Inaccessible. Yes, it's inaccessible. It's not necessarily poor.
Yeah, for a returning player, it's wonderful, but for a new player, it's horrible. I should be more clear there.
Yes. Once you have the context of a complex system, it's much easier to navigate.
Yes.
But that inaccessibility is really where D&D and other games that have a lot of complexity kind of have pitfalls.
Yes. So you've made it through these screens. You picked Alliance or Horde, I think, in World of Warcraft, good or bad, which actually fundamentally changes the game because it's like 2 separate games based on what you pick there, and you have no clue which is which going in. I didn't. I played it for about a month, if you're curious. And then it tells you to look at the skill tree and start picking skills. And they have like 5 blocks that are these massive vertical rectangles in most MMOs. I think World of Warcraft has addressed this, but other MMOs have this as a huge problem. And every single one of those skills gives you a new active ability rather than a buff. Remember, in Skyrim, you got faster sword swinging, better crit rates, sometimes an active ability. Now you're playing World of Warcraft or other MMOs, and it's constant. This has to go on the button 9. This goes on the letter G. This goes on the letter T. This goes on the button 6. You have to press 6 twice and then 9 to do this thing. Think about that as a new player. You don't even know all the buttons that activate your abilities yet, and every single thing you do activates a new ability. And making it even harder for a new player, you often get locked into the skill tree from day one. You pick one and you're stuck there. That's your class. So not only are you in a position now where you have all these like abilities you're trying to understand, you also are picking a lifetime style decision on those abilities that add more things for you to do, more things for you to understand, more things for you to process at all times, more attacks, more defenses, more things to do, and you have yet to have even clicked any of them.
Yes. Before you get to understand what play style you might like, you're locked into a play style, to a way that the game will guide you to go because you've chosen buffs for that style.
Yeah, and it's not even these passive little things you can say, oh, that's cool, and you don't think about it, but it makes your life better. It's all these active things. You have to memorize every single thing on every single button and use them at the perfect time, exactly right.
And the way that I'm understanding you say this is that when a system like this is built poorly, you actually get a consequence, right?
Yes.
When you have a bunch of buttons and you've mapped to 6 and G and a bunch of new skills, you actually play at a detriment now, as opposed to something a little bit more passive like Skyrim, where, hey, if you don't use that extra attack because that's not the way you're playing, there's no detriment to it. You just don't get that bonus.
Yeah, and I think to Skyrim, I think I'm going to word this wrong because it's been a while since I played, but you get sometimes active abilities which are like swing twice quickly and then once hold the button for the third hit and it does a special combo, and that's it. And you as a player are now like 2 hours in before you've unlocked that. It's like the third skill you can unlock in that tree. And suddenly, you now have a combination that works for you, but you've been playing for so long that that's just one new thing to think about. And it's an active ability that you could be still mashing the buttons and still getting it. You're just clicking, 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 and clicking. Sometimes you hold it by mistake, and it hits.
Now, to be fair, I love a button mash.
I do.
I've played Age of Calamity just when I need, like, just something kind of brainless. And, like, even there, you get some, like, chain these actions together and it'll do something super powerful. Or you can just sit there and hit buttons all you want and do whatever. Randomly. Yeah.
But that's a wonderful thing as well. I don't have to think about, oh, I need to hit X, Y, X, X, B, A to do a combo like in fighting games. Or I don't need to think about I have to hit 6 to get buff A, and then hit 4 to get buff B, then hit 3 and then 5 very quickly together to get those buffs on perfect timer combos, and hit 9 for devastating attack.
Yes.
I don't think about that in Skyrim. I just think click, click, hold, click, click, hold, click, click, hold, and I'm just destroying things.
And those are two different play styles. And if you really want to get very good at, you know, chain these actions together and do this super cool thing, like it comes back to, again, once you have context and you've experienced it, and you can get very good at a complex game, they become enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think back to Skyrim again, where I had certain buttons hooked up for pulling out certain spells. Now I'd hit 1 left click, hit 2 left click, hit 3 right click, hit 4 right click, hit 5, 6, got 2 spells in my hands, and I'm blasting, right? And that's me buffing myself before a fight. But I'm 10 hours in before I have all of those things bound. Before then, I have maybe 1 buffing spell, then a healing spell, and a fighting spell, and that's it. And in the early game, that's not much to think about. Just hit 1 and 2 repeatedly to switch the spells, and then left click and right click to attack, or heal and buff. And that's it. And I think even Skyrim does the many different buttons do many different things thing better, because we are only going to be doing that much later into the game.
So I want to bring this back to our topic of depth versus complexity.
Yes.
And let's describe sort of an ideal game.
An ideal,
because
okay.
In my mind, when you walk into a new game, when you open it up, right, and you're first playing, you want something that has lots of depth and little complexity. But as you go through the game, you can build complexity and lose some depth, I feel like, to really have a game that you feel expert in.
Yeah, and quite often in games, what ends up happening is you introduce a little complexity for a lot of depth. And that's a very hard thing, but that's the trade-off. You're not going to have a game with zero thinking, fundamentally, but your goal is to add as little as possible and get as much as you can in return. So let's say you want to build an ideal game, and this is on your mind, this depth versus complexity, or you as a reviewer want to call a game ideal, let's say. What's happening? You jump into the game, and who cares what genre it is, and the game says, you have nothing, or you have very little, here's the buttons you should click, try it out. You're already experiencing the depth of the game, but your complexity levels are low. You're doing the thing. That's it.
In a way to sort of personify this, let's say.
Yes.
Like, let's jump into Breath of the Wild.
Let's jump into Breath of the Wild.
Lots of people have played it. It is well loved. It's my favorite game. You start on the Great Plateau, right? And they go, you know nothing. Here's a little bit about the world. You know, here's a little bit about who you are. And you can press these 4 buttons, and they do these things.
Yeah.
And here's a guy who's going to teach you some stuff. Go have fun. And as you meander through the world, you eventually build some more skills. You know?
Yes.
You get a bow. You learn how to use that. You know how to climb now. That's kind of cool. And those things build a little bit of complexity, but a lot of depth. And your depth is exploring.
Yeah, I love the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild. I've yet to play too much of the game, but it is a wonderful example because it puts 4, I think, areas in it where you gain skills. And it says to leave this Great Plateau, go to these 4 areas, do these things. And in each one of them, you have a guide of some sort telling you, here's a new thing, here's how you use it, go try it over there in the little sandbox. And you do it, and you get the reward at the end. And they do this for all 4 of them while also teaching you movement and a little bit of fighting where if you die, you're only a few meters away. It's okay, right? And now we could do a whole episode on tutorials, but what you're getting is each one of these skills fundamentally alters and defines the rest of your game experience, but you get them carefully one by one in an environment designed to teach it to you in a way that lets you understand it effectively.
I love thinking of the Great Plateau as a sandbox. Like, conceptually, that's very, very fun to me. Because that is a really good place to do tutorials, is a sandbox.
Exactly.
And we'll probably do an episode on tutorials, I imagine.
Oh, of course. Tutorials are a wonderful topic.
And they're necessary, especially when you have games that you want to be complex.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would like to point out a few more games that I think have done really well in the depth versus complexity, keeping complexity low and depth high. And then I want to talk about a game that has done very poorly. So let's run through a few games quickly that I think did very well. You've ever played Stardew Valley?
I have played Stardew Valley.
Cute little farming game.
Yeah.
You jump in the game and it says, here's some seeds, here's some tools, go make a little plot, go destroy the things in your way, make a plot of land, grow them, water them. By then you're tired. Now you don't want to go to bed early in the day as a new player. So what do you do when you're tired? You start walking around and wandering around and you start talking to people. And those people tell you things you can do in the game, things you can do. And you even have a little quest saying, go talk to people. So you're encouraged to do it on low energy. And you do that. And they tell you about the game, they tell you about the world, tell you about the relationships, and start saying, oh, there's a mine up north, but be careful, there's monsters. Or there's a beach down south, and it looks a good spot for fishing. Or, you know, these two villagers seem to be fighting. We don't know what's going on there. Or be careful running out of energy. You might pass out, and that's very dangerous. All of these are things you need to know for the game, but the game doesn't tell you that. The people do, the villagers, the community. A game all about community has the community telling you about the game. And you go through the game making a big farm with animals and the mines and fishing and foraging and all of these different crops and custom buildings and this nice little decorative design. But you get there slowly, and the villagers are kind of there, giving you hints and giving you items for it as you befriend them. And the game plays very slowly, very carefully, and it's wonderfully done. Now, I know there's a few more really good examples of depth versus complexity. I think you have one for us too, don't you? Our fun little roguelite game, I think it's called Hades, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh.
Okay, what is Hades? Can you tell us that first?
Hades, My Beloved, is a roguelike game where you are the son of Hades, I think.
You are.
You are the son of Hades, and you're trying to get out of the underworld because you don't want to be there anymore.
Who would want to be in the underworld?
Well, I mean, look, it's a beautiful game, and your bedroom's pretty cool, but you've noticed that you can get out through a window. So you steal a weapon, and you try to fight your way out of the underworld. And the masterful thing that Hades does is you sort of beat yourself against these levels, right? You pick a weapon, you go through, you get, a couple stages in, you die. And you come right back to your house, and your dad's there. And then you can talk to people, and you can, do things in the house that
Maybe upgrade your weapons.
Maybe upgrade your weapons. Maybe make changes to the game itself. You can add more healing fountains and stuff like that. But you have this little respite in the house before you choose to, go back into the underworld
to try to break out of Hades.
Yeah. And this game is sort of it. When I first started playing it, it was really difficult. Like,
it is very hard. It's a very hard game.
And it does something that I really like, which is here's a weapon, and you learn really well what buffs. Oh, sorry. This is the bit of the system that we want to talk about.
Yes, of course.
Is that every time you pass a level, right? Every time you fight your way through a stage, you have a choice of doors and a choice of buffs from the Olympians, basically.
Yes.
Right? Athena does something, Demeter does something different, and they are all like 10%, more damage on your dash action and stuff like that.
And this kind of gets to an important piece that we should also mention. Every weapon can do a few things. You can dash, you can do light attack, you can do heavy attack, and you can do a magic attack. And I think that's about it.
I think so too.
For all of the weapons. Sometimes they have a little thing you hold and get something more, but the first weapon's a sword, that's it. Quick attack, heavy attack, little magic thing that shoots a little bolt out, and dashing. And if you dash attack, you get like a little special dash attack.
Yeah. And you learn pretty quick, like, what weapon you like to use for what thing.
Yeah,
like,
but you have to play with one before you get the other.
Yes.
Now, you beat a level. You're going in, you beat the enemies, you mash X, you mash Y, you do one magic attack, and it flies off in the corner, and you lose it because, of course, you do.
Yes.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you see this little bolt of light, and this little statue of a trident with water around it appears. And
Yes.
you talk to it, and now Poseidon's talking to you. What happens next?
You have a choice, I think. It's been a while since I played. You have 3 choices of what buff you would like. And they're all slightly different. They tend to be along a same theme, but they're all a little bit different. So you can choose what kind of buff you get. And they're all, like we said about Skyrim, they're all sort of passive.
They're
Right.
all almost
You-
all passive.
almost
you usually
all
have like
passive.
one active, kind of.
There are some weapons where you can chain some actions together and you can do something kind of powerful, but
Yeah.
you don't need to know that when you're first starting. And when you start playing this game and you start working through these buffs, you're like, oh, that sounds really good. You learn really quick which ones are actually useful to you, right? So when I see there is, I think it's a Poseidon one that I really like.
Poseidon has the best
Oh,
ones.
yeah, look. I love Poseidon. Like
He's
Percy
great.
Percy Jackson,
Wonderful.
great. Anyway, I digress. I always pick that one because I know that it matches my playstyle. And I very quickly came to that conclusion. And I would get excited when I saw that one because I know that it's going to help me.
Yeah, so you beat a level. This lightning bolt comes down, trident and water on it, has a little bit of a music effect with
And I
it.
go, oh, great, I get to see this beautiful art, and Poseidon's here.
And then Poseidon, you press A on it or whatever the button is, and Poseidon comes down. It's like, oh, little Zagreus, you are trying to escape from hell, is it? My brother Hades is not going to be
Yes.
happy with that.
Oh,
but
yeah,
we
you-
on Olympus would love to see you here. Here is my assistance to you
Yes.
as Poseidon.
Yes,
You
you
know?
have all of your family support system.
And he's
It's
a
like,
surfer
get
dude,
out
of
of that
course.
house. Yeah.
Yeah, all your family on Olympus. And you get the 3 buffs. You get
I'm sorry, are you saying Olympias?
I am. It's Olympus?
Yes.
I am so sorry. It is Olympus. So you get these 3 buffs. And one of them's like, if when you dash, it puts a little pressure out to keep enemies away from you. And others, when you attack, it does a little extra damage. And then if you do your heavy attack, it now does a new heavy attack that is different. And you look at that, and you might be a new player and say, well, I don't know what my heavy attack does. I'm not going to change it suddenly. So you click the dash one, because you've been dashing. The game tells you to dash a lot. And now your dash pushes enemies away, and you're like, whoa,
Ooh,
that's cool.
yeah.
But that's it. Everything else is the same, and you're just better at dashing or better at attacking. And it's a wonderful system, because by the end of it, you've gotten 30 buffs, plus a bunch of free stuff when you're done. And you have a stronger attack that pushes enemies away and makes them fall in love with you, so they attack the other things that you just knocked them into, and you're dashing around in circles very, very quickly with like quadruple
Yes,
dash.
Aphrodite. I love her.
Wonderful. But each of these are one small little buff that changes you a little bit, and then you play like a level or two, which can be quite long, sometimes a couple minutes, of you just with that ability, and maybe you'll die and reset and have no abilities left, and you keep doing it. And it's this wonderful, deep system, but every step is small.
Yes, and in those small steps, sometimes you will come across choices of stuff that you don't want to use. Maybe I really like dashing, but all
course.
of the options I've just been given are all buffs to my heavy attack. And that might change my playstyle because I now know that I have this buff.
And you
I
want
may
to
try
use
to
it.
experiment with it, and that lets you adapt as a player to just playing the game better and playing the game differently.
Somehow, the game makes it advantageous to suffer from sunken cost fallacy.
Whoa, wait a minute.
You take a bit of bad psychology, a bit of things that people find harmful, and make it beneficial to them for a better experience. That's the sign of a good game. So now let's talk about a bad game. Now, I love the Sid Meier's Civilization series. It is one of my favorite series of all times. But let me tell you about Civ 6. Civ 5 has the same problem, by the way, but I found Civ 6 was much worse for it. So I'm going to dig
Yes,
into that.
let's talk about the worst one.
You launch up Civ 6, which I have put nearly 900 hours into. Okay, you click single player, you click make a game, you click a Civ that looks fun, who cares what it is. Well, actually, let's focus on that. It tells you to pick a Civ, and it gives you a list of right now over 50 civilizations, all with unique units, unique buffs, 2 unique buffs, which can be dependent on the leader. So there's 2 different versions of France, but 2 different, like they have the France buff and then the leader buff.
You thought that D&D classes were bad? Try
Oh
picking
my God.
between 50 different options, and that's your first choice.
Yeah, so you could pick France with Eleanor of Aquitaine or France with Catherine de Medici, and they both have the same France ability, they both have the same unit, they both have the same unique building, but they have a different leader ability. So you go through all of that, and you look for something that says, I like to play economy, big gold. Big gold make me happy. You click that. You pick Poundmaker, who is an indigenous Civ that you probably have never heard of before.
I think we need a little bit of context here for Civ. Because
Yes.
I know that you have called it like an advanced version of Catan.
It is, and I'm about to explain
Okay,
that.
very good.
So you pick your Civ, you click go, you're dropped into a world. Now, Civ is a hexagonal board game style game focused on strategy. Your goal is to take this one civilization that starts with a warrior, a scout, a worker, and a settler, which I have mods so that you might get less than that, from the beginning of time, from the agricultural revolution, to the end of time with giant death robots. Okay? Now, your whole thing is to balance your empire on a macro scale, so from the outside, to be as powerful as possible on the world stage. And this is categorized with a lot of activities. The key one is settling and building cities, which give you buffs and resources. And you have to pick where you want to put them on the map with appropriate resources. And remember, you spawn with a settler. You have to pick where to settle your first city.
In a very Catan way of, where do you put your first house?
Where do
Or
you put your
first town?
Your first settlement. Yeah.
Yes.
Where do you put your first settlement? Where do you put your first city? But in Civ, you have flatland and hills and jungles and grassland and plains and tundra and desert and so much more. You have
lots of options up front.
yeah, you
and
have
then your
strategic resources, bonus resources, luxury
Yes.
resources, all these things on the map. Plus water, plus land, plus mountains that you can't touch.
So, as somebody who's never played Civ, you walk in, you have 50 different choices, and then on top of that, the first thing you see is a very complicated map.
Yes. And then you settle your city. Let's say you do what every good new player does and you just settle right where they spawned. Because that actually is the best advice I could give you as a new player. So you spawn in, you've settled your city, and now the game says, here's your science, here's your gold, here's your culture, here's your faith, here's your military strength, here's your resources, and here's everything else you could ever want to know about your empire. Here's how much food you have, here's your production. By the way, there's happiness. It's done through amenities. Here's amenities. By the way, your cities have housing. By the way, you're low on amenities from the second you settle your city. You have to fix that. Emergency. You have to build buildings. You have to build units. You have to explore the map.
Even hearing you describe these options, I am feeling overwhelmed.
Yes, and this is turn one.
Yes.
Now, when you go through the game, it doesn't add more, but you're confronted with all these different things right from the get-go. You need to go through the science tree to get things. Which tech do you pick? There's 4 options. Who knows? You have to go through the cultural tree. So which cultural civic do you pick? Who knows? That gives you buffs to your empire when science gives you new things you can make, right? Gold, well, that one's actually quite self-explanatory. We both know what gold does in a game. Buy things, right? But your faith lets you found religions. What do you do with your religions? What buffs do you take? Are you going to win a religious game? Who knows? Who even knew there was a religious victory at this point yet? It's a lot. As a player playing Civ, I love strategy games. I play a lot of strategy games. And Civ does have a tutorial, and by that I mean a bunch of, like, arrows that click through text boxes to tell you how to play the game. Useless. Completely useless. No one uses it. No one even knows about it as far as I know. It's hidden in the options menu for some reason. It's not even in the game menu, if I recall. I could be wrong. And that, for a lot of people, is a lot. Now, I have gotten a lot of people to start playing Civ with me. My friend Zach, my friend Alex, my friend Noel, many more people who are never going to be on the show probably. I've gotten all of these people to play Civ with me, and all but Zach, I've had to teach how to play Civ. I think I'm up to like 10 people I've taught how to play Civ. Maybe 5 of them have played, which I've like continued playing since me teaching them, which is a really high number to be fair, but it's a lot. Every single time I stop and say, this is going to be a week of input just to get them to be able to play Civ on a competent level and to know what's going on. It's a lot. Civ is a big game, and it's very deep. The reward is huge, but the complexity up front.
Yes, that
is
inaccessibility right up front is huge.
So you're a player, and you want to know if a game is good or bad for your review. You're typing up this little review, this recommendation to your friends.
You're talking to your friends, and they're saying, hey, has anybody played anything good recently?
Yes, and so you want to talk about how and why a game is good. And you sit down and you should have the language here to say, this game starts off very simple. You do very little at the beginning, but what you do feels good and it looks good and it gives you lots of options, but it gives you the time to figure it out. And once you figured it out, you can go become a sword master, you can become a bow master, you can play with shields and magic, and look at these epic things I can do. Look at me do a backflip off a rock. That's cool.
Yes.
What look at me walk a horse up a mountain for Skyrim, which
Yes.
you literally scale mountains sideways on horses.
I've
That's
heard.
a bug, but it's cool, right? But you start off and everything makes sense from the beginning. You know what's going in and you feel good from the start.
Yes.
And that, if I was listening to a game review, sounds wonderful. My friend walks up to me and says, this game, it starts off feeling epic, and it lets you understand things slowly and carefully, but in a way
Yes.
that makes you feel good.
And in a way that rewards you later, and as you get better at the game, you continue to feel the same way.
Yes.
I want to talk about Breath of the Wild again.
Yeah, let's go to it.
Because I feel like it does this really, really well,
Yes.
right? It starts off with you can button mash, but here's your abilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get past the Great Plateau, and as you encounter different realms and things, you learn about different weapons and different sort of elemental things that happen, right? Oh, if I hit the bad thing with the ice sword, it freezes. That's kind of cool. I'm gonna put that in my back pocket. Remember that. Oh, and then as you do shrines, there are little tutorials buried through the world to teach you more complexity. Hey, did you know that you could dodge if you time your attack just right? If you watch what the enemy is doing? Beautiful. That's an excellent way of adding complexity and adding a little bit of depth, right? And a little bit of reward also. Oh, I can dodge now, which means I'm better at beating things. But also, I've just learned that that's a cool new thing I can do. And I get this new animation about doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
And the beauty of a game that has a large amount of depth is how much you can do with what you've learned.
Mm-hmm.
But the struggle is, how difficult is it for you to get that point? With Civ, I invest 6+ hours into a game to become a global superpower feeling epic. But in Hades, I am 10 minutes into a run. I am destroying things, throwing a shield around, catching it, going wild, and I
you
feel
look
great.
cool and you feel good almost immediately.
You look cool, you feel cool, the game tells you that you're cool.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
wonderful
fair.
experience.
Yeah.
You play Breath of the Wild and you learn how to surf on shields. One small mechanic from something you've already been using, and all of a sudden you're going rapid fire all across the map, feeling amazing.
And that plays really well into the game of discovery that is Breath of the Wild, right?
Of course.
It doesn't just give you fighting abilities to go fight stuff. Yeah, you can do that. But did you know that if you're flying and then you pull out your bow, you can get like slow motion? And then you can use that for all kinds of nonsense.
And it's just one thing halfway through the game.
Yeah, and that's really well done. And Stardew, completely different
game.
Momentum in the game, right? Still does this very well.
Yeah.
You still are introduced to the game in a way that is super accessible and teaches you very basic mechanics, and then lets you discover some depth.
Yeah. You play through this whole game, and by nearer to the end of it, you have a...
I haven't finished Stardew.
You haven't finished Stardew. I won't spoil anything. I won't spoil anything. But you have this massive farm covered in barns and coops with animals you're feeding and are, digging up cool mushrooms worth lots of money.
Wait, hang on. My farm gets bigger?
No. Not the farm gets bigger. You've built up. You've destroyed the debris.
I'm totally kidding.
You've destroyed the debris. You have all of these buildings. You have the silos. You're producing artisan goods. You went from selling parsnips and, I don't know, the game doesn't have cucumbers. I was going to say cucumbers.
Carrots, maybe?
It actually doesn't have carrots either.
What?
Yeah,
okay.
you can't grow
I
carrots.
really haven't played that much Stardew.
Beans, melons, pumpkins. You're growing these things, and you go to making wine and aging it in casks and selling these gourmet mushrooms and cooking meals. You make it to the bottom of the mines and get special secret rewards that I won't spoil for our listeners.
Thanks.
Right? You're building a massive farm. You're catching legendary secret fish each season, right? And the game is telling you, look at all of these cool things you did. And more importantly, the game's progress system built around a community center. You're rebuilding the community center, and the villagers are actively thanking you.
Yes.
They're giving you rewards, saying, look at this wonderful impact you've had on our lives.
Yeah, and you get to talk to all of these different people and sort of feel like you get to know them, right?
But the game's not very complex.
No, but it is
slow.
Very, very deep.
Very deep.
Yeah.
And the reward is huge. It's why it's one of the most popular games of all time, even though the developer doesn't have a desk.
That's okay.
Just a fun fact. He puts his monitor on top of his computer.
I love that for him.
It is wonderful.
That is the exact energy I want from the person who makes Stardew.
Yeah, and in Skyrim, you feel like an epic dragonborn, literally destroying dragons and absorbing their life force into you to be like a god on Earth almost. But you did it through these simple skill trees. You did it through these simple weapons, these simple interactions, these short quests.
So, if we want to wrap this up into you've sat down and you're looking at a whiteboard and you're designing a game.
Yes.
And you're looking at your little box that says how complex and how deep should a game be.
Yes.
I would hazard to say not very complex, at least at the beginning.
Yes.
But quite deep.
The complexity can go up. A good strategy game is very complex later on.
Right.
But a player should always feel rewarded for their actions. And they should feel very rewarded for how much they feel like they've done in that moment. If I've played 100 hours of Skyrim, the amount of effort I need to do something should be larger than 0 hours. But I should get the same feelings afterwards. I think about in Skyrim, early on, you destroy your first dragon, very weak dragon, you feel great. Later on, you're destroying another dragonborn in a head-to-head duel in another dimension, and you feel just as cool, but very different. You should be looking at reward. A player should always get the same feeling, but how hard it is to get to that point should be going up over time to whatever your desired maximum is. And you should be looking at getting the maximum depth possible from every piece of complexity.
Yes.
Every system,
time
perfect it.
that you add something to your complexity system, every time you add abilities and stuff within the player's scope of what they can do, you need to be adding a little bit of depth.
And if you're a player playing these games or reviewing these games, ask yourself, do I feel good playing this game? Or maybe ask yourself, why do I feel so overwhelmed or so tired from this game, even though I know it's a good, fun game? You're now staring in the face the problem of depth versus complexity. The game is either too complex or not very rewarding. And hell, most games have their problems. In Skyrim, you have to spend 5 minutes sitting in that cart at the beginning of the game. In Stardew Valley, you're clearing all the debris and you don't know why.
Yeah.
In Hades, you're exploring around. You have no clue who these people are.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing of all these games is they do let you do things very quickly that make you feel rewarded.
I will say that the depth is not necessarily a reward system,
Not always.
but you tend to be rewarded in that you understand more about the game.
Sometimes the reward is more game.
More game.
More
Yeah.
game is a perfect reward.
I love more game as a reward.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it's going to be getting off the plateau and having
Yeah.
this massive world open up. It's a
Yes.
reward, but your reward is more game.
Your reward isn't a physical thing. We'll have an episode on reward systems.
Of course, we have to.
Now, those are also deep and complex, but separate.
They are separate.
Your complexity is rewarded by depth. Is
Yeah.
I think what I will take away
Your
from
complexity
this.
is rewarded by depth. How much can you do because you've put in the brain power? And we could go into even more detail of is the complexity this one-time learning, or is it going to be something like how they're going to be thinking about it nonstop the entire time? But those are all different ways that you could be thinking about it, that you could take this episode and think further. Is the game complex for a short time, or do I have to remember all these buttons? We presented these casually throughout the episode as little Easter eggs for you to think about as a viewer, as a developer, as a player. But there are different ways to be complex. And for you, maybe if you want a little homework from this episode, think about the different types of complexity. Think about, is this complex now, or is this complex forever? Do I need to just study the history once, or do I need to remember A, B, X, Y, A, B, X, Y, A, B, X, Y to do a combo for the rest of my life? That's a question for you to be thinking about. What type of complexity, what type of depth have you earned?
I just want to recap just complexity being the measure of how much stuff you can do, right?
Yes.
Your move options. How many pieces do you have on the chessboard? And depth is what can you do with them?
Yes.
Right,
What
what-
do you gain from learning it?
Of your 16 chess pieces, what can you actually move right now?
Yeah. And a good example of a chess game is what is the depth, the strategy, the different ways you can play, the different ways you can get a checkmate. That is deep, but you gain it from learning the individual pieces. That is depth from a less complex scenario. And I'd say chess is a decently complex game, but you only need to memorize a very low number of pieces. And reward is all the different things you could do, the different strategies, the different ways of showing intelligence in the game. It's wonderful. There's many different systems of depth versus complexity. In this episode, we only covered a few, but we're hoping that you now can walk away from this, having learned a little bit more and being able to identify it in your own games or the games that you play. And next time you have to ask yourself, why did this game suck? Why did I have a hard time with it? Why did I put it down? It might just be it expected a lot of you and gave nothing back for it. The game was too greedy.
You can now say to your friends when they say, what game should I play? You can say, you should try this game I just finished because it's not very complex, but it is very deep to begin with.
Or it is complex, but it lets you in slowly and you feel great doing it.
Absolutely.
Learning is fun.
Yes.
And if you feel that learning is a chore, the game is not teaching you right.
Yes.
So I think that covers everything I had for this topic for today. Do you have anything else you want to throw in?
No, I love doing this show.
It's wonderful.
No, that's a different show.
That is a different show. But in this episode, we talked a lot about depth versus complexity. We go into great detail about what different types of complexity systems exist and what depth exists, what it feels like going through it, how to identify it, and why it matters for you as a player or you as a developer. So, do we have any ideas of what our next episodes might be?
Oh, I definitely think we should do a tutorial episode.
I think we should do a tutorial. I think we also should be doing an episode on reward systems. So, tune in for the next couple of weeks where we're going to be talking about tutorials and reward systems as very fundamental concepts to your game as we continue our adventure of the art of play, of learning and playing with these fundamentally important concepts in game design.
Have fun gaming. I've been Vi.
I've been Gaia.
And this is The Art of Play.
We'll see you next time.
I need you to just say that again.
Where I said it looks like this mic has load-bearing twist ties.
Load-bearing twist ties. It's such a powerful phrase.